Stop. All right, so the meeting is now recording. So again, welcome. The event will end at 1 p.m. Eastern time. Trent's actually over in Pacific time, so it's a lot earlier for him. But our goal is to end at the hour. So if we don't get to your questions, we will follow up with you individually. At the end of the slideshow, we'll have a slide with the CE information. So if you were seeking continuing education credit, when Trent is finished and we're in the Q&A time, I'll put that up so you have the code so you can complete the CE process. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing so Trent can pull up his slides while I introduce him. So Trent Stewart is a retired pharmacist and program manager. After a career in acute care and ambulatory practice settings at the VA Portland healthcare system, Dr. Stewart transitioned to managing the organization's diversity and inclusion, civil rights, conflict resolution, and minority veterans programs. In this role, Dr. Stewart was responsible for all aspects of the aforementioned program areas, including program development, administration, evaluation, training, reporting, and advisory functions. In addition, Dr. Stewart is also a Crucial Conversations trainer, certified mediator, and certified mentor. Dr. Stewart received his Bachelor of Science from UC. He's a Bearcat. My daughter is here as well. And his Doctor of Pharmacy from the University of Washington. So with that, I'll turn it over to Trent. Thank you. Are you muted, Trent? Here, I'll unmute you.
Sorry about that. Okay, thank you, Bree, for the introduction. Today, I would like to spend the next 45 minutes providing an overview on the book, Crucial Conversations, Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High. As some of you may know, Crucial Conversations was published in 2002, was a New York Times bestseller, and has sold over 5 million copies. This isn't a communication book per se. However, it is a book about using dialogue to get the results that you want. For over 20 years, the 4 authors observed leaders in organizations who are best at using dialogue to get results. Now, every team and organization has problems. The difference between the best organizations and the rest is not how many problems they have, but whether they can candidly discuss and resolve them. In other words, the difference is how they handle these high-stake crucial conversations. If you're working through a tough issue with a customer or having a sensitive interaction with a team member, if these crucial conversations aren't handled well, you won't get the result you're after. I have no relevant financial information to disclose. I have 2 questions for you before we get started. When you were an 8-year-old child and a cousin or sibling was mean to you, how did you respond? How do you respond today when someone is mean to you? If you're like most of us, your methods probably haven't changed much. We still run to tell someone, or we may become silent and withdraw, or we may attack and try to get even. So after today's session, I hope you understand there's an alternative to become silent or violent. The learning objectives for today's presentation are to describe the elements of a crucial conversation, describe how to make it safe to talk about almost anything, describe how to stay in dialogue when you're scared, angry, or hurt, and how to describe how to speak persuasively, not abrasively. You're probably wondering, what is a crucial conversation? Crucial conversation is a discussion between 2 or more persons in which opinions vary, there's high stakes, and there's strong emotions. You have 3 choices in handling a crucial conversation. On your worst day, you miss the link between the poor results and the conversations you aren't holding or not holding well. And on a good day, you recognize the link, and then you do something to avoid dealing with the problem yourself. But on your best day, you step up and you master the right conversation. Though it seems obvious that we would choose to handle a crucial conversation well, there are several factors that get in our way and we become our own worst enemies. Humans communicate all the time, but the higher the stakes, the less likely we will handle a conversation effectively. This could be because we're used to communicating in everyday low stakes exchanges, so we become less attentive and more automatic in our responses. In high stakes conversations, we must be mindful of everything that's involved in communication, such as thoughts, words, emotions, voices, expressions, and behaviors. And so since we're not used to paying that close attention, our communication may fail. Second, in stressful situations, our adrenal glands prompt a fight or flight response, and blood flows away from our logic center to support body parts that can assist in fighting or fleeing. Unfortunately, as the large muscles of the arms and legs get more blood, the higher reasoning centers in our brain get less. Third, oftentimes crucial conversations are spontaneous and they catch us off guard and we don't have any time to prepare. And then finally, we lack the skills that we need to engage in effective communication. Why spend time learning to have effective crucial conversations? The Joint Commission suggests that communication is a top contributor to sentinel events. And then there was a study by the American Association of Critical Care Nurses that suggests that not only does crucial conversation improvement contribute to significant reduction in errors, but also contributes to an improvement in quality of care, reduction in nursing turnover, and a marked improvement in productivity. There are many different types of crucial conversations. For example, giving the boss feedback, addressing the work performance of your colleague, or ending a relationship. The consequences of failing to communicate effectively in a crucial conversation can be extreme, and lots of aspects of your life can be affected, such as your career, relationships, and personal health. When preparing for a crucial conversation, we have to decide exactly what we're dealing with. Is it an isolated event, a recurring problem, or is it an interpersonal issue? Crucial conversations can be handled at different levels, and we often get stuck because we are focused on the wrong problem. One way to tell if you're having the wrong conversation is if your level of frustration or emotions is out of proportion to the issue. More often than not, we get stuck on content, which is the immediate problem or concern, when we should be talking on one of the other levels. When people have pattern concerns, they usually fail to raise the pattern issue or talk instead about the content. For example, your conversation with an employee who is late one day this week should be a different kind of conversation if that employee had been late 3 times in the last 2 weeks. If you need to hold a pattern conversation, do not wait for a specific instance of the issue to arise, or actually schedule a time to talk only about the pattern. Now, let's say you've had a pattern conversation and you've reached some new agreements. However, the other person fails to perform again. When after repeated failed commitments, you conclude that the real problem is not the pattern of miscommitments, but it's something deeper. You then need to move to the relationship level. For example, if you decided that you no longer trust the other person to keep agreements, that's a relationship issue. At the heart of all chronic problems in our organization, teams, and relationships lie crucial conversations that we either are not holding or not holding well. To get unstuck, identify places, situations, or circumstances where you currently feel stuck or have a high potential to become stuck, and ask yourself, what bad results do I want to fix? What good results am I currently unable to achieve? After identifying where you're stuck, next identify the specific conversations you need to hold in order to get unstuck. To do so, you need to backtrack from the results you don't like to the conversations behind them. Many interactions contain 2 or more problems, and when faced with multiple problems, we often choose the simplest and safest problem rather than the real problem. Once you spot a conversation that has you stuck, you need to determine what's keeping the conversation from being successful or from happening at all. To do so, step out of the content of the conversation, observe the process and fix it, and then step back into the content. The content is, what you're talking about. The process is how you're treating each other at the moment. Process that we'll focus on for the rest of this presentation is how the flow of information affects, or how humans affect the flow of information. Are we in silence, violence, or healthy dialogue? Are there any crucial conversations in your professional or personal life that you're not holding or not holding well, that's keeping you stuck? This is a quote that I like. It's by Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was a former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court many years ago. The measure of success is not whether or not you have a tough problem to deal with, but whether it's the same problem you had last year. The authors define dialogue as the free flow of meaning between two or more people. Dialogue occurs when people honestly express their opinions, share their feelings and ideas, even if those ideas are controversial or unpopular. Dialogue is meant to fill the pool of shared meaning, which is the blue circle in the Dialogue Smarts model on this slide. You will notice that there is a ring of safety surrounding the pool of shared meaning. It's in that ring of safety where anything can be discussed. Dialogue ceases when either person moves to silence or violence. In healthy conversations, everything is shared. We don't overstate and we don't withhold information. We contribute and we encourage others to share and fill the pool. People skilled at dialogue make it safe for everyone to add to their meaning to the shared pool, because the greater the shared pool meaning in the pool, the better the decision. And since the meaning is shared, people act on whatever decision is made with both unity and conviction. So if you want to become effective at dialogue, you must learn to create conditions in yourself and others that make dialogue the path of least resistance, so you can get all the information into the pool of shared meaning. The authors have developed 7 principles that will help you get to dialogue when it matters the most. The first principle is start with heart. We often don't notice when our motives change, so getting our heart right first is the first step back to dialogue and crucial conversations. Second principle is learn to look. The best at dialogue see and respond to crucial conversations before they get out of hand. Third principle, make it safe. The best at dialogue look for violations of safety. They know that with enough safety, anything can be discussed in the atmosphere of dialogue. Fourth principle, master my stories. They're powerful skills for influencing our own emotions, so that even when we start out angry, scared, or hurt, we can find a way back to dialogue. State my path, or how do I say things that are potentially offensive in a way that will minimize the chance that you will become defensive. The sixth principle, explore others' paths, explains what to do when others move to silence or violence. Then finally, the last principle is move to action. The biggest risk in crucial conversations are at the beginning and at the end. At the end, when we move from how you see things to who's going to do what by when, or how we're going to make a decision, the conversation once again becomes dicey. Let's start with the first principle. Start with heart. We call it that because the first thing that degrades during a crucial conversation is not our behavior, but it's our motives. It's our heart. Dialogue is first about a change of heart, and only secondly about a change of behavior. The best of dialogue use 3 intrapersonal skills when they notice that their heart is in the wrong place, to refocus it on what really matters most, and to avoid sliding into familiar patterns of silence or violence. To make this more practical for you, I'd like to ask you to think back to your most recent crucial conversation. So it'll be a conversation that had high stakes, strong emotions, and opposing opinions. Think back to one that maybe you didn't handle so well. Perhaps you moved to silence. Maybe you pouted or withdrew, or maybe you became controlling and moved a little bit more to violence. and became more dominating or even attacking. Okay, you have one? We'll come back to that conversation in a few moments. The first element of Start with Heart is called Work on Me First, Us Second. In disagreements, it's human nature to focus on what you think the other person is doing wrong. But when we focus on blaming or finding fault, we lose track of what we really want, often to our detriment. When we shift responsibility, we surrender control and we place others in control of our results. When we conclude that others' behaviors is the sole cause of our misery, we place them in control of our results. More often than not, we do something to contribute to the problem we are experiencing. And as much as others may need to change, and as much as we want them to change, the only person we can change is the person in the mirror. The path back to dialogue begins with working on me first, us second. So how about in your case? Try to think back to the interaction that you reflected on just a moment ago. As you put yourself in the heat of the moment, what were you focusing on? To what and to whom did you attribute the problems that were occurring in that conversation? Could you see your own role? Or were you convinced that things would have been going better if the other person wasn't so messed up? If so, you're normal. And if so, the first step back to dialogue is to find a way to ask yourself, what is my role here? When we feel threatened, we may abandon what we want to say and instead choose to protect ourselves by staying quiet or punishing others. Earlier, when we might have had healthy motives, like producing results or strengthening the relationship, we now start to pursue unhealthy motives, like keeping the peace or winning. So to return to dialogue, it's important to understand and notice that when our motives change, they may be moving away from dialogue. Second element of Start with Heart is to refocus your brain on what you really want by asking yourself this question: what am I acting like I really want? This question allows you to look at your behavior and infer your motives. Identifying your motives is important because the motives that you can't see are the ones that control you. Once you question the shifting desires of your heart, you can make conscious choices to change them. Now, after identifying your motives, the next step is to ask yourself these questions. What results do I really want for myself, for others, and for the relationship? How would I behave if I really wanted this outcome? After answering these questions, then behave accordingly. So when you find yourself going to silence or violence, refocus your brain and ask yourself these questions, and you'll be back on your way to dialogue. Third element of Start with Heart is to avoid the sucker's choice. The sucker's choice is an either-or choice that can be used to justify unhelpful behavior by saying that you had no choice but to argue against or withdraw. Please understand that a sucker's choice is a false dichotomy. To refuse a sucker's choice, first clarify what you do want, then second clarify what you don't want, and then ask yourself, is there a way to accomplish both and bring us back to dialogue? Here's an example. First, you clarify what you want. I want Sam to be more reliable. I'm fed up with being delegated his work at the last minute because he hasn't done it. You then clarify what you don't want. I don't want to have a heated argument which will cause tension between us and won't resolve the situation. Finally, ask yourself, is it possible that there's a way to accomplish both? How can I have an honest discussion with Sam about being more reliable and avoiding causing tension and wasting time? The dialogue smart notice when they're making a sucker's choice. They stop the conversation when they notice they're moving to silence or violence, and they articulate the sucker's choice they're thinking about making, and they give a voice to it. They give it a name because if you can articulate the choices, you can refuse the sucker's choice, and you can choose dialogue. What sucker's choice, if any, did you make during your crucial conversation? Second principle is learn to look. Before we can become effective at dialogue, we need to know when a conversation has turned crucial. Some people first notice that their stomachs get tight. They start sweating, their mouth becomes dry, or their heart rate increases. Others may notice their emotions before they notice the signs in their body. They realize they're scared, hurt, or angry. While some people's first cue is behavioral, they raise their voice, their gestures get more forceful, they may stop talking, or they may cross their arms. And these signs vary from person to person, so it's important that you know how you respond. The most effective at dialogue not only focus on what's being said, but also on the conditions, what's working, what's not working, and they notice when safety is at risk. It's important to pay attention to how others react to you. When a person responds to you with silence or violence, it may be because that person does not feel safe with you. Also, when you feel unsafe in a conversation, you will resort to silence or violence. The authors define silence as selectively sharing or purposely withholding information from the pool of shared meaning. Three main forms of silence are masking, avoiding, and withdrawing. Masking consists of understating or selectively sharing our true opinions. Avoiding means steering away from sensitive subjects. And withdrawing means pulling out of the conversation. We can stop talking or we can leave the room. The opposite of silence is violence. Violence is convincing or compelling others to your viewpoint. The most three common forms of violence are controlling, labeling, and attacking. Controlling consists of coercing others to your way of thinking. Methods include cutting others off, overstating facts, and speaking in absolutes. Labeling is putting a label on people so we can dismiss them under a general stereotype or category. And attacking is when you move from winning to making the other person suffer. The biggest challenge is to watch for these behaviors in ourselves. We typically don't see our blind spots, and we usually get minimal feedback, so we continue to act in ways that are unbeneficial. To help us understand our tendencies when a conversation becomes crucial, the authors have developed a short 12-question assessment called Style Under Stress. The scoring is immediate, and it will tell you to what extent that you move to silence or violence during a crucial conversation. I have included a link to this assessment at the end of the presentation, and I would encourage you to take it. Now think back to the crucial conversation that you reflected on earlier, or a recent conversation that was very emotional. What was your style under stress with the person in this example? Did you move to a form of silence or violence? Did you choose to avoid the topic or withdraw from the conversation? Or did you attempt to compel the other person to your way of thinking? Let's move on to the third principle, make it safe. Crucial conversations often go awry, not because of the content of the conversation, but because others feel that the painful and pointed content means that you have a malicious intent. Remember the time that someone gave you difficult feedback and you didn't become defensive? It's probably because you believe that person cared about your goals and objectives. There are two conditions for creating and maintaining safety: mutual purpose and mutual respect. Mutual purpose means that the others perceive that we are working toward a common or similar outcome in the conversation, that we care about their goals, interests, and values, and vice versa. Mutual purpose is the entrance condition to dialogue. Without mutual purpose, we cannot have dialogue. Ask yourself, does the other person know that I care about their needs? Do they trust my motive? Some signs that mutual purpose is at risk include debating, circling back, hidden agendas, and accusations. Now, the instant people perceive disrespect, the interaction is no longer about the original purpose. It is now about defending dignity. While it's true, there's no reason to enter a crucial conversation if we don't have mutual purpose. It's equally true that you can't stay in a conversation if you don't maintain mutual respect. Mutual respect is the continuance condition to dialogue. Dialogue can't resume until respect has been restored. Ask yourself, does the other person believe I respect them? Some signs that mutual respect is at risk include pouting, sarcasm, yelling, and interruptions. Now, you may be wondering, how can there be mutual respect if I don't respect the individual? Respect does not mean having deep affection for someone, but it does mean that at some level, we see the other person do the civility that we owe any human being. And this is enough to allow us to engage in dialogue. So strive to meet both needs, mutual purpose and mutual respect. And when you see that the other person has moved to silence or violence, you should ask yourself, well, what just happened? And then step away from the content of the conversation, make it safe, and then go back in. There are 3 skills for rebuilding safety when mutual purpose or mutual respect is at risk or has been lost. The first step in rebuilding respect is to apologize. When respect has been violated or when you harm someone, apologize. Admit your mistake and express your regret. Make it clear that you understand what you did violated their trust. I'm sorry, I did not call you to tell you that I would be home for dinner. Sometimes people feel disrespected during a crucial conversation, even though you haven't done anything disrespectful. When someone in a crucial conversation misunderstands your intentions, you can use contrasting to help reassure them and get dialogue back on track. Contrasting is helpful for both preventing misunderstandings, and it's also useful for first aid when you can tell that the other person is assuming the worst. To do contrasting, first, state what you don't mean, which is the misunderstanding, which is puts safety at risk, and then explain what you do mean. Here's an example. I don't want to suggest that it's your fault. What I'd like to do is find the cause of the problem and help us find a solution. Remember, contrasting is not apologizing. Contrasting is putting things in perspective by putting them in context. Sometimes we find ourselves in the middle of a debate because we clearly have different purposes. There is no misunderstanding. You want to stay and finish a project, and the other person wants to go home. Our automatic reaction in these situations is to either give in or dig in, and these are exactly the wrong responses. We can use a skill called crib to get to a mutual purpose. Crib is an acronym, and it allows us to search for goals that serve both purposes. The C stands for commit to seek mutual purpose. Verbally agree to arriving at a solution that's mutually acceptable. This has an enormous impact on calming confrontations, soothing fears, relaxing defenses, and rebuilding safety. The R stands for recognize the purpose behind the strategy. We often find ourselves at cross purposes because we confuse purpose with strategy. Purpose is what we want, while strategy is what we're asking for. Find out what's behind you and others are requesting. What purpose does each serve? The I stands for invent a mutual purpose. After you're clear on everyone's purpose, you may find that you have the same goals, or you may be able to combine your individual purposes into a shared purpose. However, if you're still at odds, try to invent a higher value and a more encompassing longer-term goal that's more motivating to everyone. The B stands for Brainstorm New Strategies. Once you have agreed on a mutual purpose, you now have the safety to join forces and to find a solution that works for everyone. I'd like to close this section by sharing a story that the authors told to demonstrate this principle. There was a group of hardworking people who worked for a mayor in a major metropolitan area that took the challenge of creating an action plan between two groups of fervent activists. These activists were engaged in city government, protest, and educational efforts. One group called themselves pro-choice, and they felt that abortion is one of several options to deal with an unwanted pregnancy. The other group called themselves pro-life, and they considered abortion to be a rarely, if ever, used option for unwanted pregnancies. These groups have been at odds for years, and have often led to silence and even violence. The risk of bringing these two groups together was that there would be no mutual purpose, no mutual respect, and not enough safety for dialogue. The facilitators or organizers decided that on the first day of training would be devoted to establishing rules and guidelines and to teaching the principles of dialogue and communication. The second day would be devoted to using the principles learned on the first day to develop an action plan. So here's what happened. On the first day, there was no content or substance discussed. It was all about communication and safety. On the second day, using the principles of dialogue, it only took 20 minutes for the two activist groups to agree on a mutual purpose, and they spent the rest of the day working on an action plan. You're probably wondering what mutual purpose not only allowed them to get to dialogue, but to also create an action plan. Well, the mutual purpose that both activist groups agreed to was to reduce the number of unwanted teenage pregnancies in their community. I think this example illustrates the power of dialogue and the power of caring enough about results to truly be heard and to make it safe for others to be able to express what needed to be expressed and to work together for amazing results. The next principle is master my stories. The higher the stakes, the more difficult it is to control our emotions, and strong emotions can lead to silence or violence. Emotions just don't happen. We create our own emotions. And when we have upset emotions, we only have two options. We can act on them, or we can be acted on by them. The path to action helps us to see how our thoughts, emotions, and experiences leads to our actions. The first step on the path to action is that we see or hear or experience something. The second step is that we tell a story. We can't have an emotion unless we tell a story about it. Seeing and hearing something creates no emotion for us. The stories that we tell ourselves are our interpretations of what we saw or heard, and they assign meaning to just what happened. Remember, stories explain what you think happened and not what actually happened. Now, the third step on the path to action is where we feel something, have an emotion about what we originally experienced, but not before we tell ourselves a story. Then the fourth and final step on the path to action is that we act on the emotion that we have created. So if you want to change the action, change the emotion. And if you want to change the emotion, change the story. The question we have to ask ourselves when facing difficult and challenging emotions about high-stake issues is, which emotion will lead to the results that we really want? We're not helpless when it comes to our emotions. We can take control back of our emotions by telling a different story, one that will lead us to behave more appropriately. The path of action happens so quickly that we do actually believe that the experiences create the emotion. The key is to slowly go back down our path of action and separate the facts from the stories. We have to ask ourselves, what story am I telling myself? And what facts do I have to support it? If the skill for mastering my stories is to separate facts from stories, we have to be clear on what the difference is between a fact and a story. Facts are the experiences that we see. They're verifiable data, verifiable behavior. Stories, on the other hand, are the conclusions that we draw from combining our experiences. There are judgments that tell us whether facts are good or bad. And then there's attributions where we assign motive or cause. Separating facts from stories seems fairly easy, but it's quite a bit harder than it sounds. Think of a person who has irritated you recently, someone who has really got on your nerves. Got a name and experience? How would you describe that person? Think about the words, the adjectives, the way you would talk about this person to somebody that you trust. Now think about how you went about that description. If you're like most people, most of it is a story and contains very little fact. Remember, facts are the original concrete experiences that created the story. Now take this individual who irritated you and carefully describe the behaviors or verifiable information you have, not your conclusions and judgments. Take a few moments and try to catch yourself when using words that sound like value judgments or conclusions rather than facts. Now how'd you do? If you're like most people, you found it pretty tough to get to the verifiable data that supports the story. Oftentimes, we struggle to remember the hard facts that support our stories. We have the experience, we tell ourselves a story, we then forget the experience, and then we carry the story around as if it's a fact. This makes it difficult to challenge our stories. So what happens when you tell a different story in your example of crucial conversation? When you separate facts from stories, you are no longer controlled by one story, but you can choose another story that creates more helpful feelings and doesn't lead you to silence or violence, but instead promotes dialogue. When separating facts from stories, make sure you're telling yourself the full story and haven't omitted any facts to justify your reaction. When facing crucial conversations, we don't feel good about moving to silence or violence, so we have to do something to feel good about doing bad. There are 3 clever stories that come to our aid to make us feel good about doing bad. We tell ourselves these clever stories to justify our behavior and to excuse us from taking responsibility and from having to acknowledge our mistakes. First one is the victim stories. We must tell a victim story to feel good about doing bad. It's not my fault. I'm an innocent person here. You refuse to see how you contributed to the problem. Now, the second story is villain. To make your victim story more convincing, we take certain aspects or elements of the other person's and we blow them out of proportion, or even maybe we add a few just for the fun of it. It's all your fault. Overemphasize the other person's guilt. You use labels to dehumanize the other person. Villain stories make it easy for us to do bad things to human beings and feel good about it. We tell helpless stories when we claim to be powerless in a situation. I had no choice but to move to silence or violence. And if you tell yourself a good enough villain story, then it's really, really easy to get to a helpless story. Now, sometimes we are a victim, someone is the villain, and we are helpless. However, that is usually not the case, and we use these 3 clever stories to avoid accepting responsibility for our own actions and feelings. When we don't admit our errors, we seek ways to justify them. Once we've learned how to recognize the clever stories we tell ourselves, we can move to the final skill in Master My Stories, which is tell the rest of the story by turning those clever stories into useful stories. To turn a victim story into an actor, ask, what am I pretending not to notice about my role? To turn the villain into a human, ask, why would a reasonable, rational, and decent person act in this way? Not asking you to excuse bad behavior, but by telling another story, it may soften your emotions and it helps to humanize the other person. To turn helpless into able, ask, what can I do right now to move me closer to what I really want? This question requires a commitment to healthy and corrective action. As soon as you admit your role, humanize the other person, and make a commitment to a specific action to get you closer to what you really want, the angry feelings and upset that you may be experiencing start to disappear. We may not get to the most accurate story, but we get to a useful story, one that creates emotions, that moves us from silence or violence back to dialogue. Are there any clever stories that you have told yourself in your crucial conversation? What is the rest of the story? And is it possible now to go back to your path of action and tell a more complete, accurate story? The previous crucial conversations principles have focused on conditions in yourself and others that promote or damage dialogue. Now, with State My Path, we will look at getting meaning into the pool of shared meaning in a way that minimizes defensiveness. To begin a crucial conversation where you're beginning to wonder about the other person's motive, start with the facts, then share your conclusions. Ask for others to share their path to action. But to do so in a way that doesn't lead to defensiveness, we have to use tentative language and encourage testing. Share your facts first because facts are the least controversial. State them without interpretation. You have missed the last 3 meetings. Then tell your story. I'm beginning to wonder if you have time to work on this project. The goal is to add meaning to the pool. Be alert to safety problems. Use contrasting if you don't send a message you don't intend. And don't apologize for your views, but don't state your story as a fact. You then want to ask the other person to share his or her path to action, their facts, their story, their feelings. Can you help me understand? Asking for other stories encourages others to get to the truth. Listen carefully and reshape your story if the information that the person provides warrants it. Tentative language let others know that you're interested in their views. Leave room for others to clarify. You can use language such as, perhaps, I was wondering if, it appears to me that. You want to avoid extremes of being dogmatic or wimpy. Finally, encourage testing by asking others' views and inviting opposing opinions. Does anyone else see it differently? What am I missing here? Let me hear some other views. The 6th principle is explore others' paths. To have a constructive conversation, you need to encourage, listen to, and understand others' views. Just like you, they have a path to action, and your goal is to get them to add meaning to the shared pool. When others refuse to speak their mind or speak in an abusive or insulting manner, getting to the source of the fear and discomfort is the best way to get back to dialogue. Start with an attitude of curiosity and patience, and remind yourself that the other person may have a good reason for what they're doing. Use the 4 AMP power listening skills to retrace the other paths back to action, because we need to understand their goals, observations, and stories. The first step is to ask to get things rolling. Express interest in the other person's views. This is a simple step, but it's surprisingly uncommon in crucial conversations. You can say something simply like, please let me know what you think. The next step is mirror to confirm feelings. Here we respectfully acknowledge the other person's feelings. But you got to remember delivery is important and the tone and attitude must be correct. You say you're okay, but the tone of your voice you seem upset. Paraphrase by restating what the other person has said in their own words, so that the other person knows that you understand. Let me see if I understand you. Now, if asking, mirroring, and paraphrasing have failed, you may want to back off. But if you think you have a good idea of what the other person is thinking, and they may be afraid to open up, calmly state your best guess as to what they may be thinking. This is like priming a hand pump to get water flowing. are you thinking? Remember, the key to exploring others' path is to stay curious and patient. So what happens if the other person shares their facts and feelings and stories, and you feel that those are incorrect? Well, if you find there's still disagreement and you cannot create a mutual purpose, use your ABCs. Agree when you share views for the most part, rather than arguing about minor points of disagreement. I agree that the last 2 weeks have been difficult. Our education system and culture raises us to be critical so we're better at tearing things down than building things up. So agree when you can and build if others leave something out. I agree completely. In addition, I noticed that when you see things different significantly, don't suggest that the other person is wrong. You want to compare the two views. I think I see things differently. Let me describe how. Okay, the final principle is move to action. This is where we want to turn the conversations into actions and results. Make it clear who will participate in decision making and why. Not everyone who participates in the dialogue will necessarily participate in decision making. If the lines of authority are not clear, jointly decide how you will decide. 4 types of decision making are command, consult, vote, and consensus. Command is used when decisions are made by authority without involving others. You use this type of decision making when you must decide quickly. But it's helpful to remember that people respond better if you explain why you made a decision. Consult is used when decision makers invite others to influence them before making a decision. Use this when there are many options and some may be controversial. Be clear that you're gathering input, but will make the decision yourself. Inform all those who consulted on the final decision for the reasons and tell them the reasons why, and then thank them for their input. Whenever there is time, it's best to consult others because the outcomes are better when key people are part of the process. Generally, voting is the least preferable of the options, since it creates winners and losers, but it can be used when selecting from a number of good options and the decision isn't crucial. Consensus is used when issues are complex and the support of the decision is crucial. Everyone honestly agrees to one decision. Consensus is time-consuming, and participants should commit to support the decision. So to summarize and put it all together, remember there are 7 principles. The first principle is start with heart, and this is where you work on me first, us second, and focus on what you really want for yourself, the others in the relationship, and be sure to remember to refuse the sucker's choice. Look for safety problems and know your own style under stress under the second principle, which is learn to look. Under make it safe, apologize if there's been some violation of mutual respect. Contrast to fix misunderstanding, and then use crib to get to a mutual purpose. With mastermind stories, be sure to separate the fact from the story by retracing your path to action. Watch for the 3 clever stories and tell the rest of the story to turn those clever stories into useful stories. Finally, with State My Path, be sure to share your facts first, tell your story, ask for others' paths by using tentative language and encourage testing. Ask, mirror, paraphrase, and prime are used to explore others' paths. And when there's still disagreement, you agree when you can, build on that agreement, and then compare the contrasting views. With move to action, this is where you decide how we will make the decisions, who will make the decisions and by when, and who will follow up. Be sure to put those decisions into action and document and follow up. Finally, this is a resource page. Some of you may be familiar with the publisher Vital Smarts. They changed their name over the summer to Crucial Learning. If you're still interested in learning more about crucial conversations, they have a number of formats that you can use to get more training. There's on-demand, virtual, and in-person. And I provided a link to the style under stress that we discussed earlier. There are a number of books by the publishers that deal with not only crucial conversations, but accountability, influencing, and productivity that you may be interested in reading. And these are the references, the reference to the JCO report and the study by the American Association of Critical Care Nurses. And now I'd like to turn this back over to Pat and Bree.
All right. I want to thank you, Trent, so much for this presentation. And as you went through the presentation, I can tell that I have made a few clever stories in my day that, you know, I shouldn't have made. So thanks for the recognition of that. So now I want to ask you, what questions do you have? Come off mute, put it in the chat, so that we have about 5 minutes remaining, and we want to make sure that we answer your questions. Okay. I was thinking about some of those crucial conversations during this, one thing, Trent, I'll ask is, how do you slow down to recognize, okay, this is a crucial conversation. What should I do?
Sometimes your body starts to give you those signals. Like for some people, their heart rate increases, or and some people become emotional and they realize that they're getting angry or scared or hurt. So it just depends on the individual. We all respond differently. So it's really important to know how you as an individual respond.
All right. That's good. Thank you for that. I know. Any thoughts? Any questions?
I have a question. So first of all, I think this is so critical. And as it's laid out like this, it looks so easy. And yet it's just really not. I mean, any kind of recommendations on how to really put this into action?
I would take one of the principles and work on that one principle. And then once you see that you can master that principle, then move on to a different principle, because it's a lot of information in a very short period of time, and it can seem overwhelming. So I found it most useful to just focus on one principle, like learning to listen. So starting to notice when crucial conversations become crucial, and noticing how you respond when those conversations become critical.
Okay, that's helpful.
Might be helpful. I guess if I were to give two takeaways from this, the things that, when I went through the training, the things that I felt were most important the first time around were to remember that there's an infinite number of stories for any given set of facts. Because we tell ourselves an initial story about something we see or hear, and it may be true, but it may not be true. And so if you allow yourself to think that there might be other stories out there, you might not go to silence or violence right away. And the second thing that I thought was really important for me was to ask myself, why would a reasonable, rational, decent person act in this way? For me, that slows my path to action down a little bit. So it slows my brain down, so I can consider there might be other reasons why this person is acting in this way besides the reason that I'm thinking that they're acting in that way. I mean, they may be acting in the way that I'm thinking, but at least it gives me an opportunity to think about other reasons they may be reacting that way. And that just slows things down for myself.
Wow. I will tell you, we make those stories up so quickly in our brain. They must be this or that. Do you have a question, Miss Denise?
Yes, I do. I want to say good morning to everyone, and a special thanks to my friend and colleague, Dr. Stewart, for the outstanding presentation. I've got a quick question and I have to leave for another meeting. Sometimes when I'm having crucial conversations, and if I've been interacting with someone who seems very defensive, or they're kind of very aloof, or sometimes they seem combative in their responses, email is probably one of the worst forms of communication. So when I have a conversation with them, because I want to know what's going on, sometimes I'll bring up in the conversation and ask them directly, at some point, have I offended you? And I wanted to hear what they have to say back to me. And normally they say no, because I want to know if it's something that I've done to initiate that type of behavior. So Trent, would you consider a good approach? Usually it's been effective for me.
No, I think if you feel that you've offended someone, I think it's very, very appropriate to ask them, have I offended you? Yes.
Okay, because I use that quite often. And another thing I've noticed too, a lot of times when you're entering into a conversation or in the midst of it, there's a lot of self-interests that are on the table, and people aren't getting to the real root of the problem. They just continue to bring up what's on their mind, but that's not what the meeting's about. That's not what we're here for. And I think sometimes we have to clear through all of that stuff to get to the root of what's actually happening. So this has been a fantastic presentation. It was a good refresher for me, and I want to thank you very much for the opportunity
You're
to
welcome.
participate.
And it's when people are doing those things and they're not getting to the real issue, there might be a safety issue there that you might want to address, and because you want to make them feel safe to be able to discuss their opinions openly.
Thank you so much. This has been something that we all can use. So I want to, at this time, turn it over so that we see our CE code. All right, here's our CE code. Bree, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh yeah, you're fine. So here's the code. We sent out CE instructions ahead of this session. If for some reason you didn't receive that, I'll stay on the event here for a few minutes if you needed any help getting all of that figured out. But here's the code that you would need to punch in when you're going to complete the assessment and everything that Dr. Kim provided. And then any questions I can't answer about the technical CE process, I'll forward to her. So, but this is the code, and we're so glad that you all joined us today. And thank you again to Trent. I was definitely taking notes the whole time too, and really appreciate it. And we'll send out this recording next week to all of our registrants for the event. So even if people couldn't make it today, they'll be able to access the content. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you very much.